Good evening y buenas tardes a todos que pudieron asistir aquí y vernos a nosotros. Le agradecemos mucho. Muchas gracias. Y hoy le traemos el nuevo episodio del podcast Más allá del salón. En este programa lo que se hace es que nosotros, los estudiantes de UPR, estamos en una oportunidad nueva con conocer maestros experienciados y que nos digan cómo ellos en sus nuevas experiencias han dado clases y cómo es ser un educador en la isla del encanto, Puerto Rico. Antes de comenzar, mi nombre es Dylan Vázquez y estoy acompañado con mi libretista, Natalie Guzmán. Hola, Natalie. Y con mi otra compañera, la otra entrevista, Carla Camacho.
Saludos, mi nombre es Carla Camacho Ramírez y en la noche de hoy también estaré acompañando a Dylan Vázquez, quien es también presentador. Tenemos aquí al intérprete para beneficio de nuestro compañero Luis Vázquez y a la demás comunidad sorda. La entrevista va a continuar en inglés porque nuestro fuerte es el inglés. Así que quisiéramos darle la bienvenida a Yoseph Villafañe, quien será la persona que estaremos entrevistando en la noche de hoy.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
As I said, tonight we will be interviewing Yoseph Villafañe. who is a proud English teacher from the enchanted island of Puerto Rico. Growing up in a valley, he naturally enjoys the mountains and visiting Puerto Rico's natural parks. In 2015, he graduated from the University of Puerto Rico at Calle with a Bachelor of Arts in Education in English. In 2020, Villafañe completed his graduate studies at Southern New Hampshire University and earned a Master of Arts in English. After serving in the U.S. Army, he returned to Puerto Rico to do what he loves the most, that is teaching and saving the world one student at a time. To begin the interview, I'm going to let you with my partner, Dylan, that is going to make the first question.
Nice to meet you, Joseph Villafañe. My name is Dylan,
Same.
and thank you for your service. And
Thank you.
let's start with the first question.
All right.
What motivated you to choose this career?
So what motivated me to become an English teacher specifically? I feel that back in the day, at least, and still to this day, I felt that there was a need for students to enamor themselves with reading, right? And, even to this day, I see a decline of readers in the island and all over the world as well. So I felt that maybe if they had an English teacher that could teach them that passion, right, for reading, somebody that actually loved reading himself, maybe I could make an impact in the population. And that's basically why I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to, spread the love of reading and make it a habit in today's society.
You wanted to make a change and to be the teacher that you wanted to be, the teacher that you wanted, right?
Exactly. I wanted to represent who I wanted to have as a teacher in front of the classroom when I was a high school student and when I was in middle school and elementary school.
Same here. I want to become an English teacher because I felt I never had a truly good English teacher.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right.
I'm going to be making the next question. That is, how were your English classes in high school and how were your teachers?
Wow. So to speak of high school, I cannot just speak about my English teacher, although she was amazing. So there were three teachers that really made an impact on my life. Those were Mr. Rafael Marrero. He was my history teacher. Sandra Cruz, who was my English teacher, and Evelyn Diaz, who was my science teacher. So I would say that they were all amazing, and it was the way that they taught the class that made an impact on me, right? Specifically, you wouldn't feel that you were in a regular class. It felt more of a conversation, if it makes sense. For example, with the English teacher, Mrs. Sandra Cruz, she would engage the reading differently, right? She would have stains in her and on her knees at the end of the day, because she would dramatize. If we were reading about knights, if the knight knelt before a king, she would knelt in front of us, in front of the classroom, right? And you would see the stains at the end of the day, esas manchas, right, and on her knees. And you could really tell that she was enjoying what she was doing. With the history teacher, Mr. Marrero, it was the same thing, but he taught history as I think it's supposed to be taught, in the form of a story, right? It felt more of like a folk tale. It would be like telling us, hey, this is happening. It's like gossip, right? And everybody wants to listen to the news and the gossip that is going on. Specifically, it happened in yonder days. And that would make it very interesting for me. And even in the hallways, he would ask us questions. And you didn't feel it was a question directed towards the class. But as the conversation would go along in the hallway, he would be like, I got you. See, you were learning, you were paying attention. And you almost had a moment of realization where you go like, wow, he was actually teaching me. I didn't notice. So nos cogía como de bobo, if you know what I mean. And my science teacher, Mrs. Evelyn Diaz, She taught science, so it was a whole different perspective, right? A whole different spectrum. And she would not only teach us the theory, whereas, you know, you have the classic example of a person in front of the class having the PowerPoint presentation, and this is what you got to learn to get an A in an exam, and this is what you have to study, and so on. Mrs. Diaz would engage us at an emotional level, and she would include us in the class. It would be immersive, if it makes sense. So she would do labs, and we would apply the theory that was being taught in class. So we wouldn't be just learning about science, quote unquote, and never actually touching the lab experiments or lab equipment and whatnot. She would actually make us do the lab in the classroom. So that was really nice.
That's nice that you still remember all of the things that some of your teachers did in high school. One of the things that motivated me to be an English teacher is that I want to be the English teacher that I never had. So for me, it's
Yes.
really important to make an impact in my students.
And that's what we need. We need people that are willing to make a change and change the dialogue of education. Because if you look at education as this leviathan that cannot be changed, and it has to be the same classic story taught over and over and over, you would never be able to make an impact on your kids and your students. So we need people, right? Like you guys are coming up. You will take, you know, the mantle and change the country for the betterment of it all, right? So that's great that you guys want to change how the dialogue is running.
I want to go
Thank
back
you.
to that question because I found it really interesting that you phrase your teachers not as teachers, but more as like friends.
Yes,
Because
yes,
you didn't
definitely.
say how they taught a subject. You said how they spoke to you, how they
Mhm.
directed their attention, how they showed the subject.
Yes,
They didn't like
definitely.
teach you. They like subconsciously teach you with making it fun,
It happened
reactive.
naturally.
It just
Yes,
happened.
it
And you were
happened
just
naturally.
absorbed with the fun, the energy, and you were just captivated. And it really made you a deep impact.
Yes. To echo an old, I don't want to call her old. I mean, if she finds out about this, she's gonna go after me. But a professor that I had in Calle once told me that education is not only limited to the classroom. You can learn more about CISO in the hallways of the university than in the actual classroom, if it makes sense.
Okay, so now let's go to the next question. Next
All right.
question is a bit of a doozy. It's kind of a hard question and it's gonna make you talk a lot. So I'm expecting you to
Oh my.
think about it, or at
All
least,
right.
you know, the question is, in the years that you have been teaching, have you been able to observe how students perceive the teaching of the language as a native language or a second language, whether from a negative or positive perspective?
So in the years that I have been teaching, have I noticed that English is used as a native language or a second language, you said?
Depending on the person, the student, but how do you see how they react with the language? Do some of them hate it? Do some of them think it's useless?
Well,
Do some of them love it? Do some of them prefer it? What were the most impactful students to you, or what was the thing that most impacted you?
well, I don't want to portray myself as this superhero teacher that can change the entire world, right? But
Do
it
it.
happens in ninth grade because I teach from ninth grade to 12th grade. And I teach all the high school grades right now. So the change starts in ninth grade because that's the first contact that I have with the kids. So sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, they might not like the class because they're like, "Whoa, wait, this teacher is only speaking in English in class. This is something new for them." Whereas sometimes you might have teachers teach the English class in both languages that they command, right? Like Spanish or English and whatnot. But in the sense of how you defined native language or second language, I think that in Puerto Rico, there has to be a change in how we address that. And if we have other English teachers connected into this meeting, I'm pretty sure that they're going to be like nodding right now. Um, because native language is your first language, right? That's the language that you've been taught, that you speak at your house and whatnot. The second language is a language that you go outside of your house and everybody is speaking that language. That would be more of a reality in the United States, for example. So let's say you grew up in a household where everybody speaks Spanish at your house. Once you step outside of that door, everybody speaks English. That's the second language because you're actively using the second language outside of your house. You're forced to use that L2, as we call it in linguistics, right? Now, the reality of Puerto Rico, I think, is different. I think that we should start looking at English more as of a foreign language instead of a native language or a second language. And I'll explain why. The foreign language, once you step out that door, nobody speaks that language. And that's the reality here. You learn the foreign language as a form of improvement to your, I don't know, your job or career choices, job opportunities and whatnot. So in my classroom, I have a different approach to it. And it is that kids, my goal is to have them speak the language outside of the classroom so that it is becoming sort of a second language, if you may. So I'm not going to lie, some students don't like it at first, but once they, immerse themselves in the class and times goes by, I always have these parents that come to me and say, hey, how about you change a wee bit of your class into Spanish? And I'm like, no. And it's because I want them, right, to be fully immersed. The only opportunity that they have, at least that I know of, to practice the language is in the classroom. So in my school, at least, we teach kids for an hour and a half, right? We have Mondays and Wednesdays class that lasts about an hour and a half. And then sometimes Fridays, we teach the day one or day twos, which would be day two would be Tuesday and Thursday, right? Sort of the same structure that you guys have at the university. So that's the way we do it. So I only have 1 hour and 30 minutes to make sure that student practices the language. Outside of the classroom, I have no control of that. And it forces me in a way to make sure that the student changes that mentality and goes back into understanding the importance of the language. Because right now, if you think of English, English has become the global language. It's not the language that is mostly spoken in the world, but it's the language that is mostly used to communicate between countries. Because if you go to the UN, they're not going to speak Russian to everybody, or Chinese, Mandarin, or I don't know, Italian, right? They will speak English because English has become the global language. So once my students start to understand that importance of English, not only for their job opportunities, career choices, and whatnot, they make a mental switch. They dive into a different headspace and they start acknowledging the power of the English language within their lives. So does that answer your question? Maybe.
Yes, it did. Because
Awesome.
to be honest, my first language is English. And like you explained, my foreign language in my house is English. And once I walk out the door, it's Spanish.
There you
Nothing
go.
else. Until
There
I
you go.
arrived at the university, nobody spoke English. And like you
There you
said,
go.
beyond the classroom, they don't talk English. Because
Mhm.
everybody in my classroom used to say, ¿para qué voy a aprender inglés si me voy a quedar en Puerto Rico? ¿Para qué?
Ooh,
No.
you'll be
But they
surprised.
don't realize, like you said, because if they want to go somewhere or want to apply for a big job, that job may require English. Like, for example, airports and airlines. You have to know English because English is the basic language for everybody that is going in flight.
Yes, and even first career job opportunities that we have. For example, students at the university would apply for jobs at fast foods, factories, and whatnot, so that they can cope economically, right? And you would see, and I've been part of this for the interviews, because oftentimes people call me to interview someone else for these job opportunities, and the look at their resume and whatnot. And you would see the employer, right, take out all the resumes and deviate from the people that did not speak English in the interview versus the ones that did. So the preference, I know it sounds kind of drastic, but the preference of the person that is bilingual, fully bilingual, which is something specific, right, will always go on top of the person that does not speak English. And we live in a place that it's crowded with tourists, so we need that global language. Again, even if the person that is coming by is Italian, the first language that they will try to engage on will be English.
Well, the next question is a little controversial, but what do you think about the lack of English teacher in the Department of Education? Like, what do you why?
So why lack, as
What do
in
you
there's
think about?
fewer teachers, English teachers every year and so on? Okay. Wow, how can I answer this without getting political? So I'll try. So in Puerto Rico, we have this saying, at least back in my day, we used to call English el difícil. I don't know if you guys heard that term before, but we used to call English el difícil. So it became something cultural, right? And if you look at it from that perspective, I would say that the majority of the population here in the island, once they see that something is difficult and they have that characteristic to that specific thing, they automatically deviate towards another subject. It's not only in English, it happens with math teachers as well, and with science teachers, specifically in chemistry and physics, right? Once the Puerto Rican says, wait, this is not something that I can learn in the fly, right? It's something that I need to put emphasis in, right? And I need to dedicate time, because the acquisition of the language is not something that you just read a book today and tomorrow I'm bilingual. No, it takes time. God knows that I'm still learning. And everybody, if you're a teacher at some point in your career, you would say a teacher is a never-ending learner. So I think that the lack of teachers, English teachers in Puerto Rico, has to do with that, because it's a cultural thing. We don't like the language, or at least you didn't have a teacher like me that taught you how to love the language, to grow passionate about it. And they will at some point say, hey, I'm done with high school, or I'm done with college. I don't want to think about English at all once I'm done with this. And they would deviate to what they understand. So again, it's a cultural thing. Even to the term that I provided to you guys, the concept of el difícil, even that word, right, el difícil, it became something cultural. I think in the 1940s is where we began with that term. So I think that's the reason why many slots in the Department of Education, at least, I don't know, in public school, are not filled with English teachers. And then the Department of Education has to go on and to recruit people that possibly have not studied or don't have a Bachelor of Arts in English education, or at least they have some form of background with the language. Let's say they took advanced English composition, I don't know, and they say, okay, so they know at least this, they can teach a class. So it's very controversial. Like I said, I would try to not get all politician about it, but it's mostly that it's the cultural aspect of the language, because we are very proud of who we are as Puerto Ricans. And some people to this day feel that to understand English, or to know English, or to be able to communicate in English, would deviate themselves from being Puerto Rican, or to lack that Puerto Ricanness, esa puertorriqueñidad that we have. And I think to me, it's nonsensical, because if you look at the way language evolves, English is a Creole language. And what is the Puerto Rican term for Creole? Criollo. It takes from other languages and it's mushed together into to the convenience of this new language that we call English. English is a Germanic language, but it takes from French, it takes from Latin, it takes from Greek, it takes from the creolization of the islands that we live in, right? So it's not something that could be put in a box. I want to say it was Crenshaw that talked about intersectionality, and it's like a mangrove, right? Have you guys seen where a mangrove starts and another ends? There's no way of knowing, right? Los manglares, they interconnect. The same thing happens with language. And I believe that if you're bilingual or even multilingual, it makes you a richer person, because you have knowledge that people don't have. It puts you a step forward, if it makes sense.
I never saw that as like cultural, because I always thought it was like better opportunities. The lack of English teachers in the Department of Education, it was because in the United States that they get better paid.
That's another factor.
But
yes.
I never saw it as a cultural thing, and actually as a cultural thing, and it actually makes more sense than that, like opportunities.
Well, in the case of job offers and whatnot, it happens, but here's a caveat though. Many English teachers believe that they will teach English once they get to the States. There's a caveat, like I said. Once they get to the States, they see you as Latino, right? And if you're Latino, that means you speak either Brazilian, right, Portuguese, or Spanish. Consequently, Spanish, right? So you arrive at the school, you're here, right? You got the position, you don't know what you're teaching. And when they say, hey, here's the curriculum, guess what you're teaching to the kids in the States? Spanish, not English. That happens a lot. Rarely have I met an English teacher that has left the island and gone straight to the United States, and they automatically have an English teaching career there. It's oftentimes teaching Spanish, because they see the advantage of you being bilingual, knowing English and Spanish, and they want to use that to exploit it in a sense, and make their students who speak English learn the second language. In their case would be Spanish, or the foreign language, if you may. Another case that I've seen is that maybe you would end up teaching a reading class, but that is not often the case. Oftentimes it's you teaching Spanish, and that's something that you're like, whoa, wait, I studied English. I'm an English education major. What am I doing teaching Spanish? That happens.
Now let's go to my question, which I think you would really, really like, and I think any teacher would like.
Okay.
The question is, how do you motivate your students who are not yet fluent in English to participate and or contribute to the class?
So, wow, that's a classic one. And I get it all the time. How do I make the non-fluent students become fluent, or engage them in the class and participate, right? So I have this application called Classcraft. This year I'm using it with my 12th graders, and I want to integrate it in ninth grade, but I'm seeing how the semester develops and all that. And Classcraft makes the class become a game, right? It's sort of like a video game. The student has the ability to choose a character, just like in a story. They can become a healer, a warrior, or a mage. And every character within the game has a specific capability, in a specific task, because they're put within teams, or as I like to call them, tribes. And that creates sort of like a bond between the students. So bonding, other students engaging, that means cooperative learning. And that's the key to learn the language. Because oftentimes when I'm using Classcraft, and Classcraft selects a random student to participate, the student has to participate. Because since the beginning of the semester, they have agreed to close up, right, that agreement, right? They have said, hey, I'm going through with the game until the end. So they have to comply with whatever I say. So whenever they participate in the class, instead of correcting them, I would model. Because if I correct someone, they would be, feeling oppressed, or maybe get shy. Oh, maestro me corrigió, let me not do that again. And so instead of correcting the mispronunciation, I would model the mispronunciation, so that they by themselves know, hey, I did it myself. I said, hey, I did it wrong. I have to fix it for the next time I pronounce that word again. So Classcraft is a great way to get kids engaged.
So Classcraft, could you spell it for us, for anybody that's interested?
Yes,
Taking notes out?
Yeah, sure. That's ClassCraft all together, not separate words.
Okay.
Sort of like World of Warcraft, but for the classroom.
Yeah. And I see you put it as a game. So
Yes.
you technically became the same as your teachers, making it a
Exactly.
fun and interactive experience. And at the same time, you managed to implement cooperation and teamwork. Because
Yes.
many of us have problems in classes, and the best teacher is the smart kid in class, because you ask him and he can explain to you and you understand perfectly. And I think that's an excellent way to use even the students themselves as your own form of educational mini teachers.
Yes. It's a great way to get the kids engaged. I encourage every other teacher. It takes time, I'm not gonna lie, but I encourage everybody to use the application. It's really fun.
I'll always remember what you said about, instead of correcting, you should model your students. So when I become a teacher, I would like to do that. Instead of making my students think they're dumb or something like that, because if you lo puedes ridiculizar, as you say here in Puerto Rico, they
Mhm.
can feel brutos, and that como que crea un estereotipo en el salón. But actually, I'll apply that. So thank you. That's a good, instead of correcting, I'll model my students. The next question is, which one syllable topic do you find the most difficult to apply or teach students?
So you mean in the terms of the curriculum, like a topic from the curriculum?
Yeah.
Like the syllabus and whatnot? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's ironic because it's one of the ones that I mostly love, and the kids end up enjoying it, all to the point where they participate in competition and so whatnot. So the most difficult subject for me to cover is poetry. Why? The same thing happens again in ninth grade. If my kids in ninth grade are listening, I'm like, oh my God, I'm sorry, guys. But it takes time, right, to decompress or deconstruct that notion that they have on poetry. Every year, my school participates in Poetry Out Loud, which is hosted by El Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, where the kids have the advantage of, declaiming poetry, reciting poetry, and going all the way up to participate in Washington, D.C. and compete internationally, right? But to get them there, they first have to understand that poetry is not just roses are red, flowers are blue, and this poem is just for you, right? They have to understand that poetry is more than that, that poetry can become a means with which you tell a story, or poetry could be this medium, this conduit that you use to revolutionize a society. And oftentimes, I often quote Bonafide Rojas on this. I use the example that he gives in his poem In Front of the Class, which says, and I quote, you have to open up your chest and you let whatever falls out of your chest, you let it fall on the page. And that's the key to understanding poetry. Because if you don't do that, what's the sense of poetry? Roses are red and flowers are blue, right? It's not that. Poetry is not only about being romantic or talking about love. Poetry could be me standing up for myself and saying, "Hey, I'm tired of this. Hear me out." Or poetry could be even a grace under pressure, like Hemingway was saying. It could be you showing up the true essence of bravery. Standing in front of a crowd with a microphone in front of you, the light shining on you, takes courage. And my kids have developed that. I have a student that has participated twice, and to hear her declaim is one of the most pleasurable things that I have witnessed in my life. It's seeing your kids become better in poetry than the teacher. It's okay. We're good. My job here is done. Because I myself am a poet. I wrote a book, a poetry compilation book, and never in my years of reciting poetry, never in my years of engaging in the art of poetry, have I managed to capture the true essence of the stanza like she does. Same thing with other students. One of the highest peaks, the peak of my semester is to see a student that never wanted to participate in class and is suddenly in front of the mic participating in poetry out loud, and engaging the audience and making the audience tremble. That makes my skin, get goosebumps and whatnot, because it's amazing to see them actually understand the poem and send their interpretation to the audience. That's amazing. But I'm not gonna lie, at first it's hard. Again, in ninth grade, we have students that have that preconceived notion that poetry is boring. Poetry always has to rhyme. I teach them, no, you can have a free verse. You can have trash poetry written, whatever comes to your mind. Use that stream of consciousness. Write down, write. No cares for grammar, no cares for spelling. Never come off that page, like Bonafide Rojas said. It has to be something that echoes your heart and your soul in order for it to be implemented in the page. I oftentimes tells my kids, one of the greatest poems that I've ever read or wrote that in the past. So oftentimes when I'm feeling sad, because you are what you write, and what you write represents who you are and how you feel at the moment. There's nothing more intimate than the art of writing, because it resonates with your soul. It resonates on how you feel at the moment. And my kids, from one way or another, as they go through the stages in high school, they have learned that. And sometimes I have students that don't want to participate in the competition. But then again, you see them the next year. Hey, teach, I saw the activity and I was wondering, and that makes me have a huge smile on my face, because my job in ninth grade was transferred into 10th grade, and I'm seeing it this year. I have two students that are participating this year that last year I asked them to participate and they were like hesitating, right? But now that they have that new notion that poetry can be something so powerful, right? I believe it was the word poesis, right, from Greek. Poesis means to create. Poetry means to create. So whatever you have in your heart, it's transferred on the page. And that's how the kids change that notion of poetry. But it is hard at first. That's the most difficult subject for me to teach. All right. So did that answer your question? Yeah.
That was a wonderful explanation.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Uh, it's already hard enough to pour out your feelings and rhyme, and it's double the hard using it in your second language. So I understand why you think it's the
Well, that's
worst
another
and the
thing,
hardest.
actually. That's another thing. Oftentimes, when you ask a student what he or she has read, it's usually an American writer that wrote poetry, right? Uh, I don't know, Emily Dickinson, or in Britain, Walt Whitman. What about the Caribbean writers? How about Derek Walcott? How about Bonafide Rojas or Piri Thomas? What about our Puerto Rican writers that have chosen to write in English? So if they're Puerto Rican, going back to El Difícil, remember the cultural thing.
Yeah.
If they are Puerto Ricans, right, and they are writing in the Anglophone manner, why can't we do it as well? To write in English doesn't make you less Puerto Rican. Again, it opens a plethora of possibilities, even to the extent of using code switching. Could be writing both in English and Spanish at the same time, like in actually many of my poems and my poetry compilation, Stanza of the Storms, are written in that fashion, using code switching, and we end up right going back to the transformation of the language, because one language takes up from another and it becomes more powerful. It becomes creolized, right?
Now, for another
Uh,
question.
oh,
Oh, you go.
thank you. Like as I said at the beginning, I want to be the teacher that I never had. And as you said, you were really satisfied that some of your students that didn't even participated were like doing great at poetry, even better than you, as you said. And
Yes.
that's actually my achievement that I can barely imagine how satisfying that could be. Working a whole semester with a student and later seeing him like doing like achievements.
Yes, yes, it's very powerful. Like I said, um, it makes you it makes you feel whole when you see these kids in front of the microphone and reciting poetry. Kids that would not speak English if anything, and then out of nowhere you have these thunderous voices that you've never heard of, and the performance, right? Because when you're reciting poetry, you can move around and change the facial expressions and whatnot. It's a whole new world of experiences there for them.
Now it's my turn. Sorry. Uh, so for the next question, it's similar to the last one, but instead of more of this material from the class, it's the students themselves. And the question is, currently, what is the biggest challenge facing English teachers in high schools in Puerto Rico? So what students challenge you, or what is the biggest challenge to overcome? What is the big wall? What is the thing you have to fight to break through that wall and to help them learn?
The biggest challenge as an English teacher today, I would say, the continuum. At least I have the blessing of teaching the same kids from ninth grade all the way up to 12th grade, right? But not everybody has that blessing. Um, so the continuum provides an understanding of how the student is doing at the moment. Whatever was not managed that year, since the teacher will teach them again in 10th grade or 12th grade or 11th grade or whatever, it creates a continuum. So these loopholes, I remember when I was a student in Calle, um, colloquially would call them baches, right, in the program, because these baches, these loopholes that we have, um, if they're not addressed later on, the kid will continue on in life with that loophole, and that bache would still be there. So what happens there? You see, sometimes going back to the example of how we lack English teachers and whatnot, if we have that loophole over there, it's because of a reason. And it happens to me sometimes. Some of these things might not be fully addressed, or if we address them, again, next year I'll be able to cover them. But a problem that we have in the department is that since we lack English teachers, I kid you not, sometimes kids can go a full semester without an English teacher. So imagine the loophole that I might have, that I'm there all the time for them, available 24/7 sometimes. And I have small loopholes that I address later on. But imagine these kids that go from August to December without an English teacher. And then the next semester, suddenly, boom, an English teacher arrived at school, and now we're taking the English class. These kids are not taking the English class. All this time that the position was not filled, they were not taking English classes. When I came back from the Army in 2020, I went to a school that had that issue. I arrived in the second semester. And when I arrived, I was like, okay, so who can I speak about last semester? What did they do? Where did they left off in the curriculum? What unit in the curriculum map were they left off? And they were like, no, there was no English teacher here. And I'm like, what? So it's January. This is 2020, by the way. So we all know what happened. January, my position was declared. Then I was introduced to the school in February. In February, I get the news that the kids did not have an English teacher. And now I'm wondering, do I start at Unit 1, which was supposed to be covered in the first 4 weeks of instruction back in August? Or should I move on with the pacing calendar that the Department of Education provides? The obvious answer is start from Unit 1. And imagine all the loopholes that would be created because of that lack of having an English teacher, right? So that leads us, the loophole leads us to the next thing, fluency. Like I said, outside of the classroom, they will not, hopefully they will, but most likely they will not practice the English language. So they only have, in a regular school, 50 minutes or so to practice the language. So that fluency that might have been attained the previous year, it's most likely gone. English is an ongoing process. If you stop learning a language today and you go back to it 6 months later, a year from now or so, your fluency will not be the same. It happens to me in Spanish. Whenever I speak Spanish, and it has been a while, or I actually during the day, I speak only English through the entire day. So when I go outside of the classroom and I have to engage with another teacher or whatnot, and I'm forced to use Spanish, it takes me a couple of minutes until I, fully immerse myself in the language and I'm able to fluently speak it. I might come off as having an accent or mispronouncing words in Spanish, but then gradually I move on and I manage to attain that fluency. So fluency becomes an issue because of the lack of teachers. The lack of teachers creates a disdain in the continuum. And like I said, it goes so far as sometimes even going through a full year without having the English class. So for me, that's the biggest issue. Because when they arrive in my classroom and they see the English teacher only speaking English, they're like, whoa, espérate, what's up? ¿Qué pasó aquí? Where do I go from here? They're baffled, right? So it's, again, a culture clash that I have to deal with every single year. But as the year progresses, oftentimes I would have a parent come and, like I said earlier, hey, could you switch up a little bit of Spanish, in the class? And I always go, no. I tell them to trust the process, right? Chill, relax. Your daughter, your son will be speaking English in a couple of months. Maybe not fully bilingual, but they will be slowly obtaining the language, right? And it's gratifying because as you're teaching, You say stuff to the classroom as you're having a conversation with them, and that student that at the beginning was not able to understand you, you slowly see them nod, like, yes, I'm understanding, okay. And it's unconscious, right? It happens naturally. So it's something that as I take them through the process, they obtain. So the fluency, and the fluency again is connected to the continuum of having an English class, of following through. It's easily addressed if you have the same English teacher every year. But to be honest, that's not the reality of Puerto Rico. And it's a heavy workload as well.
It's really hard, and to be honest, you have so limited ability that you can barely reach. But like you said, you only took one semester, and you didn't have that much time, so your
And
reach
then
was
it was
very limited.
2020. Like we went on
Even
we went on
kids were
quarantine,
traumatized,
lockdown.
kids were lost. So you were on hardcore trying to teach.
Yeah. It was something. I'll tell you that it was something. I'm not gonna lie.
So that is the last question. You were an excellent interviewer. But for
Thank
those
you.
that did not understand that very well, that do know English but got lost through us, let's do a quick recap in Spanish, en español. So, lo que te motivó para ser un maestro es tú poder hacer un cambio, ¿verdad? Y
Yes.
tú ser el maestro que te inspiraron a ti y tú serlo para las nuevas generaciones, ¿verdad?
Yes. Y si me escuchan los maestros, le doy las gracias a todos mis maestros de la escuela superior y a mis profesores universitarios.
Ok. Y la segunda pregunta fue, ¿cómo fueron tus maestros y cómo fue la escuela? Y tú mismo lo dijiste que tus maestros fueron excelentes, fueron bien interactivos, te llamaron la atención, te ayudaron a enseñar y fueron más amigos que maestros. Y eso fue lo que te ayudó a ti a aprender y a ti motivarte en tu sueño y en tu carrera.
Correcto. Ujú.
Y la tercera fue, ¿cuáles fueron los aspectos negativos y positivos de nativo o lenguaje secundario de estudiante? Y tú dijiste que había bastante negatividad, pero a la vez tú trataste de combatir eso y que no todo el mundo va a poder aprender de la misma manera, porque ya cuando tú estás en tu casa, tú hablas de un lenguaje y cuando sales al otro es otro lenguaje diferente. Y mayormente gente no se siente muy cómodo en saliendo de su caparazón y abriendo y aprendiendo nuevos más.
Definitely.
En la cuarta hablaste de cómo fue de difícil, cómo es la falta de maestros de inglés del departamento. Y tú como tal lo describiste a lo último, que hubo un semestre completo que no tenían un maestro de inglés. O sea, tú lo dijiste tú mismo, más que era 2020. Aún había menos, porque todo el mundo se fue para allá a Estados Unidos para tener lo mejor. Y los estudiantes tenían las manos vacías y no tenían a nadie de depender. Y los maestros que estaban muy limitados, o como también dijiste, van a Estados Unidos, inmediatamente son maestros de español cuando quieren ser maestros de inglés.
Correct.
La otra fue cómo tú motivas a los estudiantes, que eso fue como tú lo dijiste con Classcraft, que es básicamente como Dungeons and Dragons, que te ayuda a
Exactly.
mejorarte a tu personaje y ayudarte a mejorarte a ti y a la misma vez cooperar con tus compañeros y poder interactuar y ayudar a los demás a aprender y hacer que todo se sienta un proceso divertido, igual como tus maestros del pasado te ayudaron a ti. Que se sentía más como un juego y una amistad, menos una un maestro con educación.
Una figura de autoridad, sino una
Exacto.
persona con la que podía tener una conversación.
La otra era lo más difícil para ti en el sílabo. Como dijiste, era la poesía. A nadie se le hace fácil rimar. Y tú mismo lo dijiste, no tiene que ser rimar por sí decir. pero también a todo el mundo se le hace difícil expresar sus emociones. Y
Ujú.
más haciendo eso en un segundo idioma. Pero tú lograste ayudarlo, que al principio el proceso es difícil, pero lo logras hacer como quieras. Y a algunos se le queda ese impacto y siguen adelante y piensan que son mejor haciendo esto. Y tú mismo lo dijiste, que hay un estudiante que logró ejercerte y en tu opinión mejoró que tú. Y eso yo creo que es lo más que un maestro espera, que su
Ujú.
estudiante sea mejor que ellos mismos. Porque si son mejor
Yes.
que a ti, significa que tú hiciste un buen trabajo, que le hiciste un impacto, que no solamente lo enseñaste, pero lo dejaste a ellos que siguieran aprendiendo y seguían siendo mejor ellos mismos.
Yes.
Y la última fue el reto más difícil, que, como dijiste, que tenías todo limitado. Y como todo otro maestro en el mundo, inglés, español, matemática, francés, italiano, todo tipo de maestro, lo único que no tiene es que está en todos los lados.
Exacto.
Porque tú puedes
No lo
enseñar lo
pudiste
que tú
haber dicho.
puedas,
Exacto.
pero como quiera lo logras hacer, hay veces que puedes tocar aquí, tocar allá, pero tú eres limitado.
Ujú.
Pero lo tratamos de hacer.
Yes. Esa es la
¿Logré
meta.
explicar bien lo que fue el punto de tu vista de la pregunta?
Sí, sí,
Quisiera
excelente.
añadirle algo más para nuestros viewers.
No, nada. Gracias a todos por haberme invitado. Estoy bien contento de estar aquí y poder virtualmente tocar base con la universidad que me formó, ¿verdad? Y mi encouragement para los maestros que están viendo esto es que, como ustedes bien dijeron, que se salgan de la caja, ¿verdad? Que rompan esas paredes, como el profesor Molina y el profesor Steider decía, el campus puede ser el profesor. No necesariamente tenemos que dar clase dentro del salón, no necesariamente nos tenemos que limitar al PowerPoint, la pizarra, the chalkboard and all that. La educación es mucho más que eso. Y el sistema nos quita la creatividad. Quizás si nos vamos más a la creatividad podemos hacer las cosas diferentes.
Muchas gracias por compartir, ¿verdad? En la noche de hoy y contestar nuestras dudas y contar tu experiencia de cómo ha sido ser maestro de inglés aquí en Puerto Rico. Espero que esta entrevista le haya servido, ¿verdad? De mucho uso a todos aquellos que aspiran a ser maestros de inglés. Muchas gracias de igual forma a la intérprete que estuvo para, ¿verdad? Acompañando a Luis y a la comunidad sorda. Y les quiero informar que para el próximo miércoles el tema es estrategias educativas y desarrollo profesional en los maestros de ciencia. Así que si tienen la oportunidad, conéctense a la misma hora a las 7. De igual forma, muchas gracias también a nuestra profesora Claris Ramos por brindarnos este espacio para así conocer más sobre los maestros en Puerto Rico y más sobre el Departamento de Pedagogía. Esto ha sido por hoy de Más Allá del Salón. Muchas gracias y buenas noches.
Good evening.
Same.